Hello everyone, Ethan here. Today I'm going to be talking over a presentation about One Piece and its representation of Japanese culture and history. For a summary, I'm going to talk about the Wano arc of One Piece and how it critically analyzes its decision to close its borders, as well as how it talks about shared culture through the form of positive masculinity. So, without a further ado, let's jump right in. For my primary source, I am covering One Piece, the best-selling manga in Japan, illustrated and written by Ichiro Oda. As a quick fun fact, Oda was born in Kumamoto, and Kumamoto has built a series of statues to honor his story. The story of One Piece follows the adventure of Monkey D. Luffy on his quest to become the king of the pirates. This series is published in a magazine called Shonen Jump, arguably the most popular shonen manga publication. A shonen is a type of manga that pertains to a young male audience and often has strong themes of masculinity. A shonen is typically an action manga that follows a protagonist chasing after a grand goal or achievement. Typically, the protagonist will achieve these goals through combat. I would relate this type of manga to something like Marvel Comics, where the Avengers have to save the universe by beating Thanos in Mortal Kombat. For this presentation, I will be covering the Wano arc, a story arc that is set on an island themed around Edo period Japan that takes place late in the story. For this presentation, I want to specifically cover a single chapter from the Wano arc. The chapter I'm covering is titled A New Age, and it is chapter 1055. This chapter is towards the end of Wano, and I wanted to cover it because of the various themes shown of positive masculinity and cultural representation of Edo Japan. So, for some context about the borders of Wano, they were created 800 to 900 years ago during the Void Century, an event that happened in the world of One Piece which remains shrouded in mystery. These panels on the right, taken from chapter 1055, reveal to us that this is how it went down. While the borders remained closed and no positively masculine characters were present, the country fell into dismay. People were starving, children were drinking infected water, and mothers were even killing their children so they wouldn't die of starvation. This was because an evil ruler named Orochi came into power with the help of an Oni named Kaido. He cared not for the citizens and abused his power to indulge in pleasure while neglecting his people. As well as this, the country focuses on the development of military weapons. This causes people in the country to starve and suffer. This suffering is a representation of Edo Japan when it was first closed off from the world. At the time when the borders were closed, the current shogun felt that the Christian God and church were threats to his authority. He forced every outsider to leave and faced those who refused to give up this faith with execution. This is an important representation because those in Wano who also chose to go against the shogun were met with death. An example of this happens earlier in the story where a character named Yasui was sentenced to death by firing squad. This was because he was accused of going against the shogun by conspiring with the rebel alliance of our main characters. But when the borders are finally opened in Wano and Orochi is dealt with, strong, positively masculine characters arrive and the country flourishes because of their leadership. People are no longer starving, babies are happy, clean water and food are available regardless of status. For my interpretation of this, I look to Edo Japan and the consequences of the borders being closed. A quote I took from one of my sources states, "At the same time, the downsides of isolationism cannot and should not be overlooked. When a civilization removes itself from the rest of the world, it automatically rejects all the good that could possibly result from cultural diffusion, from life-improving international relations to life-saving scientific innovations." From this quote, we can learn that, without the outside world being connected, Japan lacked good things that could have come from the outside world. In Wano, while the borders are closed, those in power only care about the flower capital. They turn their farmlands into weapon factories because the leadership only cares about the capital and they fail to represent the people who live outside of the capital, which is a representation of Japan failing to care about the outside world and the consequences it has on a culture. As a continued analysis from Brinkoff's article, I wanted to talk more in depth about the enforcements that came with Japan's borders closing. While Japan was enclosed, the ones who held power were allowed to make rash and harsh laws based on their perception of justice. This can be interpreted as a form of masculinity. The desire to hold power over others or force one's perception on other living beings can be interpreted as toxic masculinity. The quote reads, "Entering or leaving Japan was punishable by death, a sentence all too eagerly enacted. In 1597, Shogun Toyotomi ordered the execution of some 26 Christians, 20 of whom were Japanese, and one of whom was a young 12-year-old. Their bodies were crucified. This practice, uncommon in Japan, was intended to send a message to missionaries as well as those considering conversion." This quote talks about the lives lost from the shogun of Japan during this enforcement of extreme violence. This is represented in one piece from the constant trials and executions given to people in Wano who Orochi believed may be related to the Kozuki clan. Orochi is a good example of a person in power who clearly and forcefully uses his power in government to force his own perception on his people without any regard to the consequences of his actions, or how his actions will affect the daily lives of his citizens. This shows how dangerous a leader can be and how seclusion can lead to unjustified violence. For my second analysis, I will be looking at one of the prominent characters in Wano and One Piece, Kozuki Momonosuke. I find this character very fascinating because his story is actually represented in Japanese culture from the story of Momotaro, or also known as the story of the son of a peach. To tell a quick summary, Momotaro was a child born from a peach floating down the river. He's adopted by a couple that found him, who decided to name him Momotaro, Momo being peach. After he matured, he left home in order to fight a group of Oni, or demons, who reigned evil over the land. These Oni live on a distant island known as Onigashima. During his adventure, he meets a talking dog, monkey, and pheasant who all agree to help in exchange for some of Momotaro's food. Once the group reaches Onigashima, they defeat the band of demons and return home with the treasure and the demon chief as a hostage. There are many connections between this story and Wano. Firstly, Momotaro is represented as the character Kozuki Momonosuke, who is the son of Wano's previous shogun, Kozuki Oden, before Orochi took over. Momonosuke escaped Wano because it was being dictated by an evil, self-proclaimed demon known as Kaido, who is known as the world's strongest beast. Kaido and his pirate crew, known as the Beast Pirates, represents the evil group of Oni, as well as where they reside, known as Onigashima, which is the island that is also in Wano. Each of the animals Momotaro encounters are all represented by characters in One Piece as well. The most important is the monkey, who is represented as Luffy, but common connections also include a character named Marco, who is the pheasant, and Yamato, who represents the dog. Momonosuke's character development into a positively masculine character is also highlighted by his supernatural growth. When Momonosuke is introduced to the story, he is an 8-year-old boy. As the story progresses, he makes mentions of wishing he could be stronger. And finally, at the climax of the story, through supernatural aid, he is able to age himself 20 years in order to become the figure he wishes to become. For some context, Momonosuke is the rightful shogun of Wano, but he was too young to become the ruler and lacked the power to take it back. Since he was able to escape Wano, he was able to find help from Luffy. To Momonosuke, Luffy represents all the masculine traits Momonosuke aspires to represent. Luffy is charismatic, cares about his friends, always helps those in need, and despises quote-unquote evil people. Momonosuke wants to embody these traits, and continues to watch diligently over Luffy's choices in leadership. He was able to learn a lot and grow as a person because of their adventure to return to Wano. At the time, he was a child, So, he views the world from the lens of a child. He has this idealistic sense of leadership that allows him to find the courage and strength to take action. Momonosuke as a character pertains to a shonen audience because of his growth. Momonosuke embodies traits that the audience can relate to. Somebody who wants to be stronger and tries their hardest to improve but is held back by social customs or physical strength. He would not have been able to find this growth without outside help, which ties into the negatives that came with Edo Japan closing its borders. It was through divine masculinity that Momonosuke was able to lead his country. For my interpretation of this character, I wanted to talk about this quote from another one of my sources. The divine masculine is very action-based, focused on doing rather than being. Spiritual author of The Self-Love Experiment, Shannon Kaiser, explains that the divine masculine is universal fatherhood energy. It's all about the things like structure, logic, and taking charge. This quote talks about divine masculinity, the ability to take action using structure and logic. Momonosuke is able to understand his position after a long journey of finding the strength to lead. As stated earlier, a large part of this journey is him becoming the man he wants to be, physically, by convincing one of his retainers to age him through supernatural forces. Because of divine masculinity, he is able to open the borders of Wano and bring forth a new age for the country. This portrayal of masculinity pertains to the audience of shonen while at the same time gauging cultural representation from Japanese history. Momonosuke is the most important figure of the Wano arc, representing growth, leadership, and Oden's representation of Edo Japan's history. This panel is from chapter 1055. It depicts Momonosuke fighting back against a powerful adversary who shows up to Wano after Orochi is defeated. This is important because of how he is acknowledging the fact that in order to lead his country, he needs the strength to do it alone. This panel of Momonosuke is a powerful representation of divine masculinity as it shows him taking charge of his people by finally gaining the strength to protect others. In One Piece, the Eastern Dragon is a symbol of power and respect. First, Kaido uses a dragon form in order to oppress Wano, and then when Momonosuke attains this dragon form, he is able to harness it and use it to represent positive masculinity. For my first reflection, I wanted to cover the work of Murnissi, so I decided on this quote. This two-way exchange turned my ex-interviewers into helpful informants who soon taught me that we were not talking about the same thing. Westerners had their harem and I had mine, and the two had nothing in common. This ties into the culture of Japan and its representation in One Piece for a few reasons. Due to the fact that during the Edo era, the shogun closed the borders, this led to a lack of communication between Japan and the outside world. The country was completely localized and nothing got in or out. This caused the citizens to have little understanding of the outside world and what they were missing out on. This is represented through Wano and shows all of the negative aspects that can come from closing a country's borders, though they may be exaggerated a little bit because Oda loves to exaggerate ideas and representation. For my second and final reflection, I picked a quote from Hals's work that states, "Primarily, culture is concerned with the production and the exchange of meanings, the giving and taking of meaning between the members of a society or group." What I've taken from this quote is that the desire to learn gives the desire to share. Wano represents Edo Japan and the fact that it lacked communication to the outside world. This quote targets the fact that having a culture will drive people with the desire to share their knowledge with others not like them. When the borders are closed, Wano is not able to share its culture and learn about the world. They are kept in the dark from the outside world, and this causes the citizens to desire to escape and see what the world has to offer. This point is important for One Piece because one of the manga's primary themes is freedom. To be completely free is one of Luffy's desires, as well as the citizens of Wano who represent the citizens of Edo Japan. Momonosuke was able to escape, and because of this, learned to be a true leader. This is one of the most important representations of Wano. Many wanted to be free, but to be inside a country with borders, it feels as though you are trapped. One Piece as a whole does a wonderful job of representing this idea of freedom. So, in conclusion, the Wano arc of One Piece offers a critical perspective towards Japan's historical decision to close off its borders, as it engages in an analysis of Japanese culture and portrays the influence of positive masculinity from the outside world as a form of shared culture. And these are my sources. Thank you for listening.